You know, have you ever really stopped to think about how your body knows exactly where to send help after an injury? I mean, it's not random. It's this incredibly precise rescue mission, and it's all orchestrated by a secret code, one that's hidden deep inside our DNA. So today, let's dive in and crack that code.
Okay, so picture this. There's damage to the central nervous system, like the spinal cord. Instantly, the body just sounds the alarm. Cells right there at the scene, they completely change their behavior, shifting into this reactive, repair-focused state. It is a total all-hands-on-deck situation.
But here's the real mystery, right? In a structure as crowded and as complicated as the spinal cord, how do the right cells get the message to activate, but only at the injury site? Without causing total chaos everywhere else? That is a question of unbelievable biological precision.
To find the answer, we've got to zoom way, way in. I'm talking past the cells and right into the DNA itself, because that's where the instructions, and more importantly, the switches that control those instructions, are hiding. So first, just a super quick refresher. The easiest way to think about your DNA is like a giant cookbook. Each individual recipe in that book is what we call a gene, and it holds the instructions to build one specific thing your body needs, usually a protein.
Now, you definitely don't want to cook every single recipe in that book all at once. That would be a mess, and that's where enhancers come in. They're these tiny little segments of DNA that basically act like light switches. They don't have recipes themselves. Their only job is to flip the switch on the right gene in the right cell, telling it exactly when it's time to get to work.
And you can see here, the idea is simple, but it is so powerful. When the right signal comes along and flips that enhancer switch to on, the gene it controls lights up, and it starts pumping out its protein. This is basically how a brain cell knows to act like a brain cell and not, say, a liver cell. But what happens when the situation gets a little more complicated? Yeah, what about a switch that needs to stay off pretty much all the time, under normal conditions, but has to turn on instantly and only in one very specific type of cell the very moment an injury happens? Well, that's a much more sophisticated kind of switch.
And that is the emergency code that a team of scientists set out to crack. They wanted to find the genetic master switches for the body's elite repair crew.
So how in the world did they do it? Well, first, they studied the spinal cords of mice at different times after an injury. Then, they profiled tens of thousands of individual cells, looking at which genes were switched on and which parts of the DNA were even accessible. And finally, and this is the really cool part, they fed all of that massive amount of data into a deep learning AI to find the hidden patterns in the DNA, to find the switches they were looking for.
And you know what? They found them. Not just a few, but thousands of them. They discovered this whole new class of enhancers that have this amazing dual control. They're not only specific to one type of cell, but they're also only activated when there's an injury. And they gave them a name, IRENs, which stands for Injury Responsive Enhancers.
Okay, so how do these IRENs manage to be so incredibly precise? It turns out they aren't like a simple light switch at all. Nope, they're more like a high-security lock that actually requires two different keys to open. See, a normal enhancer, that's like a lock with just one keyhole. If you're the right cell type, you've got the key and bam, the gene turns on. But an IREN is a whole different level of security.
Just imagine this lock right here. The first keyhole, it needs a cell identity key. Now, this key is a protein that's only found in one specific type of cell, let's say an astrocyte. But the second keyhole needs a totally different key, an injury signal key. And that key is a protein that only shows up in the area when there's damage.
So here's the absolute crucial point. You need both keys at the exact same time. An uninjured astrocyte has the cell identity key, sure, but it doesn't have the injury key, so the lock stays shut. A different cell type right at the injury site might have the injury key, but it's missing the special cell identity key. It's only an astrocyte located right at the site of the injury that has both keys needed to turn the lock and activate those healing genes.
This two-key theory is just brilliant. But of course, the scientists needed to prove that it actually worked in a living system. So they came up with this incredibly elegant experiment to see if they could use an IRN-FNE to literally light up a target.
So here's the test they designed. They took one of those Astra-specific IRENs they had discovered, and they attached it to what's called a reporter gene, basically a gene that makes a glowing yellow-green protein. They then packaged this whole thing into a harmless virus and delivered it to a mouse. So here was the big question, the moment of truth. If they then injured the mouse's spinal cord, would this iron act like that perfect two-key switch? Would it turn on the glow gene only in the astrocytes located right at the site of the injury, and nowhere else?
And the result was, honestly, it was stunning. It worked perfectly. You can actually see it right here in this cross-section of the spinal cord. That bright cluster of glowing cells, those are the astrocytes, right at the epicenter of the injury that have turned on the gene. The code was real.
This comparison just makes the precision crystal clear. On the left, you've got a section of the spinal cord that's far from the injury, and it's dark, the switch is off. But on the right, at the site of the damage, it just lights up like a city at night. This isn't just targeting a cell type, this is targeting a cell state, that reactive, injured state, with absolute pinpoint accuracy.
You know, this discovery is so much more than just a fascinating piece of biology. By cracking this code, scientists have basically unlocked the blueprint for a whole new generation of what we can call smart therapies.
The really important takeaway here isn't just this one IRN for astrocytes. It's understanding the design principles. We now know the syntax, the rules of the code, for how to create a switch that activates only in a specific cell, but also only when that cell enters a specific disease or injury state.
And the potential applications are just breathtaking. Imagine, instead of a glow gene, you load in a therapeutic gene. We could deliver medicine that tells cells at a spinal cord injury to reduce scarring, or tells cells near a traumatic brain injury to protect themselves. We could even potentially target the specific, malfunctioning cell states we find in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
I mean, listen to how the researchers themselves put it in their paper. They said they can now design DNA sequences that can be programmed to target disease-associated cell states. This is a total paradigm shift, from treating the whole body to treating just the cells that need help.
And this brings us to a final, really powerful thought. For centuries, medicine has been about treating symptoms from the outside in. But now we are finally learning to speak the body's own native language. We're learning to write code to activate its own powerful systems for healing. So the real question isn't if we can do it anymore, it's what, in the vast complexity of the human body, could we choose to repair next?